G'day guys, today I'm sitting with Peter George, who is the incoming director of Arctic Minerals, who have just snapped up Rare Earth Energy Metals, which was the company that Peter was running up until now. So we're sitting in Ormol near your flagship Hennes Bay copper project. Could you tell us a bit about, firstly, who you are and what this deal entails?
Yep. Yeah, well, thanks, John, and yeah, thanks for the invitation to come and talk to you on your show. I guess, is it a show? Can we call it a show?
Yeah, podcast show, whatever floats you both. Yeah.
So look, well, I guess I can start at the beginning a little bit about myself. So I'm a mining engineer by profession, School of Mines out of Kalgoorlie, going back quite a few years earlier than yourself. So a couple of Aussies in the middle of Sweden, which is a little bit strange, but we'll run with that. And I think I graduated around about 95, something like that, but I got the opportunity to come over to Sweden as an exchange student in 95 from the WA School of Mines through Luleå University. Had a wonderful opportunity there to work together with, I got the opportunity to work together with Boliden and did my Masters in explosives over at the Laisvall mine, which is unfortunately now closed, but probably one of the more beautiful mines I think I've ever worked at in my life, with the 50-metre high pillars in a room and pillar mine underground. So my history with Sweden goes back, basically 30 years to the day, and went back to Australia, worked for Western Mining for a while whilst I finished off my degree, and then got the opportunity to come back to Sweden, worked for Boliden for 6 years, operated a number of their big operations, so the Petiknas mine and the Renström mine, where I was the mine captain and deputy mine manager, and also worked in their technical division. So I sort of spent a lot of time over a lot of their operations over here, and obviously learned how to speak Swedish, and I guess I should also say I met my wife over here who's Swedish, and 2 of my kids are born here as well. So it's definitely a Swedish flavour.
Yeah, you've definitely got roots in Sweden.
Definitely got roots in Sweden.
You're not a fly-in.
No. So, and I was lucky enough that I was here long enough so I could gain dual citizenship as well, which is becoming rather useful for what we're trying to do at the moment. Which I guess brings me back to what happened after Boliden. I went and worked together with my father, and we built up the family consulting business over probably about 10-15 years. Then I got back into operations. I was over at worked with Kimberley Metals Group, with Keras, which then turned into Calidus, with Minres, which I did just before I then went off and worked with Alicanto Minerals, which is I was MD for Alicanto for 4 years, I think, where we were building up the Sala and the Falun projects over here. So we've got a lot of recent experience in Sweden. I think we drilled about 25,000 metres over a period, and learnt an awful lot as to how to operate over here in these modern times. I finished with Alicanto going back to the start of last year. Was really sort of knowing that I wanted to do something else up here, but I sort of took a little bit of time off after 25 years of going flat stick, and I could see that there's just numerous opportunities up here. And then I went off and had a good chat with a few good mates of mine, including Erik Lundstam, my chief geologist from Alicanto, and also he and I both started in Boliden back in 1995 on exactly the same day. So still mates over all that period of time, together with a very nice fellow by the name of Robert Behetz, who's also a long-term friend of mine, ex-Western Mining Corporation, but sits on about 6 different boards and a managing director for an ASX-listed company as well. And just talked about what the opportunities were. Bob didn't know an awful lot about Sweden. Obviously was relying an awful lot on what we knew. But really we wanted to have that critical metals focus. I'd had quite a bit of background from my Minres experience on the lithium side. I didn't really want to go down that path again. And so we really focused in on wanting to become a copper explorer up here in the Nordics. And potentially any other critical metals that would come along with it. So we started Rare Earth Energy Metals going back into last year. we found a couple of projects. So there was the obviously our Hennes Bay project, which is down not too far from here in Warmall, which I couldn't quite believe it was actually available to be picked up. So we picked up that project. It's got about 25 million tonnes at about 1.14% copper equivalent, around about 0.9 percent copper and 25 grams per tonne gold, silver. Sorry, not gold. It'd be nice if it was gold. Yeah. And we also picked up the Swan Lake project up near Boden in northern Sweden, which just coincidentally sits in between Arctic and Lava, probably the two most important copper porphyry projects in Europe.
Arctic.
Yeah. So, and some of the stuff that we could see up at Swan Lake project, such as the demoderite, which is you can only ever see that in one other place in Sweden, and just a very good indicator of another potential copper porphyry sitting up in that particular area.
Sitting smack bang between two.
Smack bang in between of them. Yeah.
Mines. Yeah. Okay. So what I got from that is basically you have had a strong background in Sweden. You understand how this jurisdiction works, which I think is underrated when it comes to companies coming in from overseas. So that's great to hear. Now, Rare Earth Energy Metals, that was a private company beforehand, so there wasn't a lot of news flow previous to that. But now Arctic has snapped you up, and they're listed on the First Nordic Growth Market. So I guess you'll be stepping onto the board of Arctic now. What's your main focus coming in with Arctic?
Yeah, well, look, it was always our intention to, myself and Bob and Erik to follow, the asset through to a listing. We weren't sold on exactly where we were going to list to begin with, so we actually looked at quite a few potential RTO targets on the Australian Stock Exchange, and just there was always something wrong. Either too many pieces of paper or a board that didn't necessarily want to hand over control, or they were basically on the bones of their backside with no money. So in the end, we decided that there was this opportunity with Arctic themselves. So Peter Walker is the chairman of Arctic Minerals. So he's based over there in the UK, famous perhaps in this part of the world for having discovered the Kevitsa project, which they then sold onto First Quantum, which then ended up being one of Boliden's major assets in Finland. So, the pedigree behind Arctic itself is very nice, but Peter, by his own admission, he's getting a little bit long in the tooth, was looking to hand over to the next generation. There was a friend of both Peter's and the Bob's actually that introduced them to each other, and we just thought, there's too many pluses on this particular potential there, so we ended up doing a 50-50 merger. So all of a sudden, we've Bob and I and Erik and our REEM shareholders have come away with 50% of the Arctic Minerals company over here with a listing on the Nordic First Growth. So it's just a fantastic opportunity for us to really take that next step. And as you said, REEM, Rare Earth Energy Metals, we didn't go out and tell anybody about what we were doing. That's the beautiful part about being a private company. You don't have to tell anybody. And really our aim was to just quietly go about collecting the assets that we wanted. We went off and we raised $300,000 privately amongst our close contacts and friends last year, and that meant that especially around Hennes Bay and Swan Lake, we'd pegged those particular projects, and we had those, and at Hennes Bay especially, where we could see where the historic drilling was and the historic resource was sitting. But in the field work that we were doing, we could actually see this mineralisation popping up at various places over 30 kilometres away. So we took that 300,000 and we doubled down, and we pegged all of that ground in and around the projects, and also a bit up at Swan Lake, with the aim of getting ready to either do an IPO or an RTO. But then we ended up doing I guess you call it an RTO together with Arctic, or a merger with Arctic, and here we are today.
Fantastic, yeah. So I guess drilling into Hennes Bay, because that was the Swan Lake doesn't have it's not as far as advanced, I guess, as Hennes Bay. So there's quite a lot of historic drilling put into this. And you're saying that you have 25 million ton resource. How could you get access to all of that historic drilling through the SGU? And I guess what's the next step with that historic drilling?
Yeah. So we've done a lot of work on that, and we went up to the core shed, I guess you could call it. It's a bit more than a shed up in Marlaw. Yeah. We found all the core. So there's a lot of drilling that's in between sort of the 50s and the 80s that was done by the Swedish state to delineate that ore body, which I guess you could also ask the question of, why is it still sitting there? Why did nobody pick it up? But I guess if you look at those sorts of grades of around about the 1.1% copper, and go back between the 50s and the 80s, that was low grade, and it wasn't particularly that interesting to everybody. But now here we are in 2025. You could argue that we've hit peak copper, and the average grade of mines around the world has dropped from nearly 1% down to nearly 0.5% in the last 25, 30 years. And all of a sudden we've got a significant resource with a high grade on it, which I just couldn't believe my luck when I came across it. And so the work that we've been doing, that the guys at the geos have been doing, so they've gone back and re-logged significant amount of the core. We've re-assayed about 10% of the core, and we had a very good correlation between the old assays and the new assays. So we're currently going through that process now of getting a JORC compliance or JORC compliant resource for Hennes Bay. It is
based off that historic
drilling. We've seen the collars. We've got all of the data. We're using an Australian third-party resource geology company to do all the work for us. I'm hoping that we'll have something in the new year. But one of the other things that came out of that work that we did was that we also discovered that there's significant intercepts there of a couple of other critical metals which we weren't necessarily aware of to begin with, such as the gallium, the germanium, the vanadium, and the rare earth metals that sit within this as well, which I think is obviously rather topical at the moment. So having that as a nice potential byproduct kicker is pretty exciting for us as well.
Yeah, definitely. With China banning the exports of germanium and gallium, that's a pretty opportune timing. So that's a bit of upside on it.
Most definitely.
Now, I guess for viewers, you're saying 0.9% is the copper grade, 1.1% as a copper equivalent. Like you say, that is now pushing towards higher grade, the higher end of the spectrum in Sweden, because we look at Viscaria there, they're sitting around 0.8 to 0.9%, and that's been a huge discovery over the last, huge project over the last few years. And ATIC is mining grades down at kind of like 0.2% even, and getting by different porphyry style, but this isn't negligible grades, like you say.
No.
So I guess as far as Hennes Bay, so that drilling was, you pegged the ground all around that old resource. So you're expecting this thing to grow, or are you seeing repetitions of what you see in that previous resource?
So of the ground that we've picked up, there's really only drilling on about 5% of the tenement package. So we've seen this popping up in outcrops, up and down over about a 30-kilometre area. So, but this is quite typical of these sedimentary copper style deposits where, the mineralisation can be very consistent over a large area. So you can do the maths yourself and realise that this is going to be an awful lot bigger than 25 million tonnes. Where we'll end up, I don't know. But I think in my mind, I'm really aiming to begin with for getting over that 100 million tonne mark, just as putting my mining engineering hat on, somewhere between 5 and 10 million tonne per annum style mine or collection of mines over at least a 10-year period is really what I'm looking for. That puts us up in, sort of world-class type scenario for comparing us to other operations around the place. And I think your example of Viscaria there, I mean, those guys are the poster child for what they've managed to do in the last 5 years. I mean, I remember, I think I even did the scoping study for Viscaria when it was owned by a little Australian company called Avalon on the ASX, going back not too long ago to remember, over 10 years. Yeah. And but they could never get more than about a $20 million market cap out of the company for that. And that now, I think today, they've done another 100,000 metres worth of drilling. I think they've grown their resource from, you have to forgive me if I get these numbers wrong, but somewhere around 45, 50 million tonnes at around about 0.9 to 1% copper, to grow to maybe doubling that over that period of time.
98, I think, is what they're sitting at.
And but they've managed to grow their market cap from that $20 million in Australia to the equivalent of, over $200 million Australian. So it was about 2.5 billion SEK today, and really, not only are they, they've added a little bit more to the resource, but they've been progressing very nicely along the permitting and the permitting phases and the technical phases of the project, which is exactly like what we want to do. So they've done a fantastic job.
And I guess that's where it helps having that background in Sweden, knowing how the country works, knowing how the Landstyrelsen and all of those systems work. Copper obviously is very hot at the moment. It's getting talked about in the media a heap. So I think it's a fitting time for it. Now, we've spoken about Hennes Bay, which is more or less the flagship. Did you want to give us a run through of what's going on with Swan Lake up close to Arctic?
Yeah. So that's a very interesting project. So like I mentioned, there's I'm not going to insult the geologists, which I know you've got quite a number of readers, by pretending that I know exactly what's going on up there, but. We do have Erik here with us today, so you can maybe ask him a couple of questions about those if you like. But I think the demoderite, if I've said that correctly, it's like a very blue stone that they used to quarry out there going back into the 80s or 90s, which they did a couple of test pits on it to see whether it was worthwhile for building bench tops and those kind of things. But it's only ever seen in one other project around, and it's a very strong indicator of a copper porphyry, and I think that's what probably got our interest to start with. We've now been out there for 2 or 3 field seasons now, really building up the geophysical work that's been done out there, all of the grab sampling, and I think we're probably about a year away from maybe doing some bottom of till drilling. And really just taking it to the next level to determine what we've got. But, we're pretty confident that we're, potentially have another copper porphyry on our hands there. And as the geos always say, where's the best place to look for copper porphyry, which is right next to the one that exists.
Next to one,
So we're sitting in between 2 of the major ones that are up here in this part of the world. So that's a super exciting project for us. Then, of course, we've spoken a lot about the REEM projects, but then, Arctic themselves, they've had the Bidjövagge project over in Norway, and then Kuusi and Tavast over in Finland. I guess I'd classify our Finnish projects as very early days exploration in a similar fashion to Swan Lake. Don't have any drilling into them at this point in time yet, but very, very strong indications. With copper boulders at surface and quite high grade. So, these are, I guess I've showed you that, our balanced portfolio diagram that we have, and maybe you can put that up for the readers.
But I'll flash it up.
That shows us, what we're really about is, very strong projects, but also a very strong technical focus of just moving these projects up through the various milestones and hopefully every time we move them up, we'll get our projects and our company will get re-rated. And then, of course, that leads me to the Bidjövagge project as well, which that's an amazing project just in itself. That was an ex Outokumpu project that was mined back in the 90s. It still has a resource on it of about 3.3 million tonnes of copper ore. But post that resource, they've had some phenomenal intersections over there. I really should have memorised these by now, but the grades in those particular hits just a couple of examples of 18 metres at 2.2% copper and 34 grams per tonne gold. 27 metres at 3.1% copper and 0.6 grams per tonne gold. If this was in Australia, geos would be frothing at the mouth to get in there and drill it. But so it's an interesting part of the world. It's up there in Finnmark, up in the north of Norway, which for the everyone that lives over here in the Nordics, it's a very famous part of the world for having these types of deposits. But it's also a very sensitive part of the world with regards to having to negotiate with the local Sami people, and Bidjövagge is a classic example of a project that's sort of just been, I guess, a little bit locked. As everybody works out how to have those negotiations and discussions and get permits to move forward. But I think the word that I'm getting through is that's starting to thaw. And some permits are now being released. So when we have a number of companies that are operating up in that part of the world, Kings Rose included, that seem to be doing quite well up there as well, and a few other companies that have moved in there in recent times. So I'm actually pretty excited about not only those sorts of grades, which we've never included in the old resource, but the opportunity to get out there and drill some more, maybe even as soon as the next the next summer season, in June next year.
Yeah. I think those relationships with the key stakeholders, the Sami people and the people who are in the ground up there is key. Yeah. And knowing that going into it is the biggest battle. So
well, it is. It is hard for Australian investors to sort of understand what that all means, but we're so used to it over here now that it's just a part of the process. There's no point getting angry or upset about it. You just have to make sure that you do as the quality of work that you do. Your technical work has to be of absolute high standard, and you have to consult and discuss with stakeholders on a regular basis. And it has been a little bit frustrating in Sweden, I suppose, going back to maybe 3 years ago. Before that, it was a little bit like if you're a miner or an explorer in Sweden and the Nordics, you're a bit of a pariah. But I think that's completely flipped over the last 3 years to now. It's getting a huge amount of press. We're getting support from all sides of government, wanting to realise that after COVID, when the Chinese started to really flex their muscles over control of the metals, and then of course the Russians invading Ukraine, and we could no longer, the West could no longer really rely upon their supply chain. It really put a focus onto the Nordics, which is, I guess you could almost say, is the breadbasket of Europe with regards to supply of these critical metals. And that permitting is really been a major focus. I don't think it's quite resolved yet, but it feels an awful lot like where we've been in Australia for the last 25 years, going from basically having a very limited sort of permitting system to the system that they have there now, which is top of the charts with regards to the amount of detail and technical studies that you have to go into. But a whole industry is being built around that now, and they've also resourced up the mines department so that you can actually put in all the work, and then you realise that there's everything will be dealt with in a reasonable time frame over there. We're still going through that process over here over in Sweden, but I think the signs are definitely headed in the right direction.
Definitely, yeah. Which I think is a good segue through to what Europe declared earlier this year, the Critical Raw Materials Act, and copper being very high up on that list of raw materials that Europe wants to mine and process themselves. So I'm not sure if you've got it on the top of your head, but as far as where does copper sit in that Critical Raw Materials Act? Yeah,
well, it's a critical metal, so it's very important. There has been a certain amount of focus on the lithiums and these other, and cobalts and these sorts of things, but I think copper's in everything. Yeah, basically everything that we have except for food that we eat, and it powers everything. Your phones, your cars, your batteries. So it's kind of been a little bit forgotten about, but I mentioned at the start that I think that we've reached peak copper, and I think that's even not taking into account the green revolution that we're going through at the moment. There's just no way that we can. I think BHP or somebody has come out and said that we need to discover and put an Escondida into production every year for the next 10, 15 years to meet the demand. We haven't found an Escondida since Escondida. Which is, I don't know, what's that go, about 15 years ago, maybe 20. I actually don't know, but a long time.
Over 10, yeah.
So, that Critical Metals Act is a major shift in European politics, which is, Sweden and Norway. Well, I know Sweden and Finland are definitely signing up for it. Hopefully Norway will sign up to it as well. Obviously not part of the EU, but still, operating in the same marketplace. But I mean that also leads towards these strategic projects that they're looking to do now as well. And I think there was some 170 applications for strategic projects, and I'm not sure how many of those were copper. If there were any, there aren't many. But we also know what we've got. There aren't too many projects or companies coming in after, well, for example, Viscaria. They've got a pathway through to production. There's really just us with existing resources that could potentially take that next step. So, a pretty exciting time as far as I'm concerned for Arctic.
Extremely, yeah. So I guess as far as what future plans now, what's the next step for Arctic Minerals?
Yeah. So the focus is on our advanced projects just at the moment. So that is the Hennes Bay and Bidjövagge. So we raised 14 million krona in September, October this year. So we didn't want to raise too much at these low levels of valuation. It's really my job and why I'm here. I've been in Luleå, I've been in Helsinki, I've been in Stockholm, I'm here today, or heading over to Gothenburg next week, just meeting with high net worths and potential and existing investors. So really about getting, and obviously meeting with yourself, get out to your listeners to what it is that we're doing. So that's my primary focus at the moment, and just really understanding who's who in the zoo as far as all of those things are concerned. I've got a bit to learn about what's going on in Finland and Norway. I mean, I understand the process in Sweden like the back of my hand. There's no problem there. But, Norway and Finland have got slight variances to all of that. So we've got a little bit to learn. But, we're, I guess, on Hennes Bay itself, that's, as I mentioned before, we're going through that technical work now to convert that historical resource over to a JORC compliant resource, and I hope to have that soon within the new year. And once we've got that, that's going to give me an idea of really where we're at, how far away are we from that 100 million tonne sort of goal that I've got in the back of my mind. Mm-hmm. I also know that Erik and the geos are putting in a power of work of understanding what's happening on the structural side. And utilising the geophysics that's available, and potentially doing a little bit more geophysics with maybe some IP to get an idea as to how what's controlling the copper, but I guess what's also really controlling where the proximal or the high grade part of the mineralisation sits. So we've got some theories on that, and I guess we'll go out and take a bit of a look at the Stora Strand mine. That was mined back in 1905. So they, as an example, that's part of the same system over at Hennes Bay. I'm not sure how far away it is. It's probably about 30 kilometres away from Hennes Bay itself. But again, just one of these other areas where the mineralisation is popping up. But I think that had some very high grade copper. That I think they mined on average 1.4, 1.6% copper.
When was that mined?
So that was closed in 1905.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think there's even some video which you might be able to show and show the viewers. But that was only mined for a few years back then, and obviously all handheld techniques and completely different from what we'd be doing today. But there was also tonne gold that was mined out of that, which is very interesting because we haven't seen that gold popping up over on the western side, over at Hennes Bay and Dingelvik yet. So there's definitely stuff going on there that we don't understand. But that's that's what happens when you've only really explored 5% of your tenement. So
exactly. Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of exploration upside there.
Huge.
So yeah, we'll be looking forward to some news flow as far as a JORC resource for Hennes Bay, and then also just getting cracking into exploration.
Yeah, and obviously that's we'll start moving through the gears on potentially even start looking at a PEA sometime in the new year
for Hennes Bay.
Which could then. I really wanted to sort of get an indication as to what's going on there before I put in an application for a strategic project as well. I mean, we could have potentially put in the application for a strategic project already now, but I thought, no, let's be a little bit conservative at this stage, figure out what's happening. I don't think the EU even knows how to handle 170 applications yet. And it'd be interesting to see how many of those get approved and how many get knocked on the head. But I mean, as far as Hennes Bay is concerned, that's already a project of Riks interest for Sweden. So it's already been recognised by the SGU as a very important project for the state. So just going through the EU and getting that tick is just another sort of part of the puzzle, I think, in getting this thing approved.
So you brought in an advisory committee into Arctic Minerals recently in a announcement you made in November. Could you just tell us who you've bolstered with the advisory committee?
Yeah, well, first off, we've brought Erik Lundstam in as our. I mean, Erik I've known for many years. I rate him as probably one of the best exploration geologists on the planet. He'll never say that about himself, but I think he has about 6 or 7 discoveries on his own right in this part of the world. I've also brought in Duncan Large. Again, he's I guess he would call himself a semi-retired geologist nowadays, but with a massive amount of exploration experience in Europe, having been involved in quite a number of large companies and has been operating up in this part of the world as well. And then of course my old friend Lars-Erik Aarø, who is going to be very well known to the Nordic mining community, especially in Sweden, as an ex-managing director of LKAB and divisional chief of Boliden. So he was actually the divisional chief of Boliden at the time when Erik and I both started as graduates.
Right.
We went different directions going back in the late 90s when Lars-Erik went off to LKAB and I went back to Australia, but always kept in contact and I approached Lars-Erik around about the same time as what I did with Erik with regards to what I wanted to do with rare earth energy metals, and Lars-Erik thankfully was an early investor in what we were doing, and his connections into the Nordic mining and exploration community and the investment community are of a massive benefit to us. So and he's been helping me out the last couple of weeks with I guess a road showing over up in Luleå with Luleå Näringsliv, over in Helsinki. We were in Stockholm over at IBA during the week, and then I'm heading over to Gothenburg next week to continue rolling on and telling everybody about what we're doing and where we're headed. So no, really pleased to have those 3 gentlemen on an advisory committee. It just adds that extra layer of expertise and network that I don't have myself. So.
Yeah. I mean, such an important part is the team. Sometimes people say it's as important, if not more important, than the assets. So, and knowing that you've known these people for a long time.
Yeah.
I guess there's a certain amount of trust that goes along with that.
Oh,
as
absolutely.
well, so.
You can't do it without a fantastic team of people around you, and you can't know everything, and then a number of these guys that have been around, they probably just the amount of knowledge that they have is second to none, and their contact network, like I said, so very valuable assets for.
Yeah, well, thanks for your time today, Peter. Yeah, like you say, we'll go out and we'll kick a few rocks and have a look around. Yeah. Look forward to some news flow. Is there anything else you wanted to say closing out?
No, I think I've spoken enough for one day.
Beauty. All right. Thanks for coming on.
Good on you. Cheers, mate.
Today I'm sitting with Erik Lundstam. He is a geologist with a lot of over 30 years experience within Sweden. You were a principal on rare earth energy metals, that private company. And now that Arctic has snapped them up, you've stepped in as a advisor to progress all of the copper and assets that are in the portfolio. So I'd love to pick your brains about the geology side of things. Starting off with Hennes Bay, because that's the flagship. In Sweden, they're not so used to strata bound or sedimentary hosted copper here. When we've got Aitik and we've got kind of like the more copperstone or viscaria style deposits. Could you run viewers through what you think's going on with the mineralization style at Hennes Bay?
Okay, so the copper mineralization at Hennes Bay sits in almost 2 kilometer thick sedimentary sequence that we call the Dal Formation. And it's in the almost very bottom of that formation that we see the copper mineralization. And it sits in the contact between footwall sandstones and horizontal and hanging wall graphitic shales. And what we think is going on is that at some point in time there's a hydrothermal event where we have a limited amount of copper-bearing fluids migrating through these footwall sandstones. So it's an aquifer with a limited amount of this. And where those fluids hit the graphitic shale, they drop copper over a very, very large area. So we have covered 3 municipalities where we can re-find this particular stratigraphy. Now, we do see some zonations in the copper minerals, vertical, but we are now trying to understand if there are larger lateral zonations that can help us navigating around in this system because it's so large. Mm-hmm. And I argue that as we've seen about the same grades of copper over such a large area, we're essentially looking at distal parts of the system, including the historic drilled resource. So that is truly a distal part in the system.
Okay. So I guess firstly the zonation you're talking about, is that a zonation in copper species? Or?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So we go from chalcocite to bornite to chalcopyrite and pyrite. Mm-hmm. And this is something you can see over a couple of meters vertically in any cut of the horizon. Many similar style mineralizations globally. You can actually see these style of zonation laterally, but on much larger scale. Okay, so if we do have that here, it would be a great vector help for us.
Absolutely. So I guess as far as your targeting strategy, you're trying to find that graphitic shale. That's the host unit, and it's widespread over. You're thinking it's widespread over a larger area than what's previously thought in the drilled resource.
Yes, correct. So we can it's hundreds and hundreds of square kilometers where we can refine this stratigraphy here and there, but it's also covered by a granitic trust sequence. So we have 1.6 billion year old granites being trusted from the west on top of the whole Dal Formation that is 500 million year younger. Mm-hmm. So it's a very horizontal trust sequence, and in quite a large part of the area we have 100 to 200 meter granite sitting top of the whole formation, which historically some people have understood without really drawing the big implications, what it means. And what it means is that we have the whole copper mineralized formation preserved underneath these granites.
Okay, so I guess, and that would have limited previous exploration abilities without actually drilling it, because you're not seeing as much outcrop as what you'd expect.
Absolutely. So people will map granite at surface, but underneath it you have the whole formation intact.
Okay, and so are you seeing any type of magnetic signature from these graphitic shales to see whether they're going under the granite?
Yes, we are a bit lucky. So the actual graphitic copper-bearing horizon, it's also magnetic. So we can track that very nicely with airborne mag.
Yeah.
We also have some tens of meters on top of the graphitic shale, in parts of the old rift system, a very magnetic extrusive basalt formation.
Okay.
And it picks up the mag very, very easily. And we are trying to study this basalt extrusive to recreate the architecture of the rift, because that's the first place you start when you're trying to understand ore-bearing conduits, is looking at those rift faults.
Okay. So you're thinking this is a rift basin which is providing the initial pulse of fluid.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And being those old rift faults probably were the highways to distributing these limited resource of hydrothermal fluids into these footwall sandstone aquifer.
Okay. So I guess as far as the ore body, I guess we can call it ore body because it's got a resource on it. What's the structural situation there? Like what angle is the ore body dipping, and how would you go about mining it if this came to it?
So the mineralization has everything very shallow, flat dip down to vertical. So it's a function of the structural history. At the historic resource, most of it is quite gently dipping, 10 to 30 degrees, with local much more steeper angle and even vertical parts.
Okay.
So it varies, but it's a function of that thrusting deformation that affected the rocks.
It's folded and thrusted. Okay. So yeah, Hennes Bay sounds like there's a fair bit of upside as far as being able to extend this. If we now take a look over at Swan Lake, do you want to give us a quick rundown of what the geological architecture is there and why you think there's exploration upside there?
So we have discovered what we think constitute, hydrated quartz vein systems of porphyry style in porphyries. We also have rediscovered the dumortierite, which there was an attempt to mine that for nice floors and so on. But dumortierite signifies, a place either in the carapace of porphyry systems or a little bit further out in the epithermal parts of such a system. So it's a really, really, really good indicator for this style of environment.
Okay, and I guess for those who are into neurology, it plays a big part. You've got two major mines in Arctic and sitting on either side of this thing. So I guess the chance that you've got that same intrusive style is increased.
Well, if you look at porphyry systems globally, most of them are much, much younger than the rocks we are working with.
Okay.
So these rocks up in northern Sweden, they are almost 2 billion years old, whereas many porphyry systems on the planet are much younger and much more well studied. What you can see in them is you don't get one porphyry alone. You get a cluster, usually lining up in a very trend-wise fashion.
Yeah.
So it's quite easy to make the assumption that between Lower and Arctic, there's going to be several more of these style deposits in there.
Yeah, where there's the best place to find a porphyry is next to an existing porphyry.
Correct.
Yeah, we have the same saying in gold in Western Australia as well. The best place to find gold is next to a gold body. So okay, fantastic. Thanks for the rundown of the geology behind that. We'll take a look out in the field at what we're seeing.
Sure.
Thanks, Erik.
Thanks.
Cheers.